45 years ago, in the quiet suburb of Maple Hollow, west of Chicago, winter settled like a weight no one could lift. The wind from Lake Michigan howled through bare trees and rattled window panes. Snow clung to every roof, and under the yellow glow of street lamps, the neighborhood looked frozen in time. At the far end of Willow Lane, a two-story red brick house stood still amid the drifting fog, home of James and Margaret Dane, married 30 years, both creatures of habit. James, 58, a retired railroad security officer, was known for his stern posture and his insistence that every light be off by 10 p.m. sharp. Margaret, 54, taught music at the local elementary school, remembered for her lavender perfume and the gentle rhythm of her voice. On the night of Friday, November 14th, 1980, their neighbor, Helen Morris, stepped outside to take out the trash. Through the swirling snow, she saw the faint orange flicker of the Danes' fireplace reflecting off their living room window. She thought she heard voices, harsh, low, indistinct. Then silence. She shrugged it off. In this neighborhood, nothing ever happened. By morning, the house looked untouched, yet wrong. The front steps were buried under fresh snow. The Saturday Chicago Tribune lay soggy and unread at the door. No smoke rose from the chimney that had glowed the night before. When Helen called, no one answered. By Sunday, the Danes' usual pew at St. Luke's Church sat empty for the first time in 17 years. That afternoon, their only son, Stephen Dane, 28, arrived in his faded Buick, tires cutting neat lines through the snow. He knocked on the front door, then the back. Locked. Curtains drawn. "Mom? Dad?" he called softly. Only wind replied. On the front steps, his footprints merged with something else, a faint drag mark, half erased by the storm. Stephen stood there for a long time, staring through the window at the cold, dark fireplace where a warm glow had burned every winter night of his childhood. Now it reflected nothing but black glass and the pale shimmer of snow outside. He exhaled, a cloud of white breath mixing with the mist. By 7:45 that evening, he was at the Maple Hollow Police Department, his voice trembling but steady. "My parents are missing," he said. That night, the snow thickened, burying the small cul-de-sac at the edge of Willow Lane. At dawn, the red brick house looked half swallowed by white, as if winter had decided to keep it. Sergeant Richard Hale, head of the small investigative unit, arrived at 8:20 a.m. on Monday. A man in his early 50s with a tired face and the slow caution of someone who's seen too many lies. He opened his black leather notebook and wrote the first line. 2 adults missing. No signs of forced entry. The front door's Yale lock was intact. Windows sealed, only thin frost glinting on the inside glass. Inside, the air hung heavy, still scented faintly of smoke. On the table sat 2 coffee mugs, both cold. A folded Chicago Tribune dated November 15th lay open to a story about a train derailment in South Chicago. Next to it, a pair of reading glasses and clock on the wall, its hands frozen at 9:42. Hale's flashlight swept over the living room floor. Under the coffee table, a faint circular stain, partly wiped away. He crouched, switched on a portable UV lamp. Under the violet glow, small specks bloomed faintly. "Could be blood," he said softly, motioning for the crime scene tech to swab it. He moved to the fireplace. The hearth was thick with blackened residue, the kind that comes from oil or solvent, not just wood. The ash was still warm to the touch. "Collect samples," Hale ordered. "Bag and label A1 through A3. In the kitchen, a utility knife with a cracked handle sat by the sink. The blade rusted brown, its edge dull. The air smelled faintly of gasoline. Bottles on the shelf were neatly arranged, except for one empty cleaner bottle. Hale lifted it, sniffed. Solvent. Someone had scrubbed, and not well enough. Upstairs, the bedroom was immaculate. Bed made tight, pillows aligned. On Margaret's vanity, every bottle and brush in place, except for an open jewelry box missing its wedding ring. Hale noted the faint circular dust mark where it once lay. No luggage missing, no drawers emptied, everything perfect except for the people. In the basement, the smell changed, a deeper mix of damp and smoke. Near the furnace, Hale found a small pile of gray ash, separate from the hearth, as if someone had spilled and swept carelessly. He knelt, touched it, frowned. It felt sticky, smelled faintly of burnt oil. He glanced at the crime scene tech. Bag this too. B2. As they left, snow was still falling, muting every sound outside. Hale stopped on the porch, boots sinking into slush. The street was empty, the world too quiet. He wrote the morning's final line in his notebook. No break-in. Fireplace warm. Ash unusual. Possible blood trace. Missing person status undetermined. The police car pulled away, its red lights cutting to the white blur. Behind it, the house sat silent again, the clock inside forever fixed at 9:42. The moment time stopped. The morning after the initial search, the red brick house on Willow Lane stood wrapped in silence, its chimney dark against a white sky. The snow had stopped, leaving the neighborhood frozen under a thin blue haze. Sergeant Richard Hale returned at 8 a.m. with 2 forensic technicians and a county photographer. The frost on the door handle crackled when he turned the key. Inside, the air was colder than before, a still, bitter cold that seeped through gloves and coats. Every sound echoed too sharply, from the creak of the floorboards to the click of the camera's shutter. Hale's breath fogged faintly as he stepped into the living room. He wrote in his notebook, "Scene secured. November 17th, 80. Second examination." The front door showed no pry marks. Windows still locked tight. No footprints except their own. The house was sealed from the world. And yet 2 people were missing. Hale moved slowly through the room, studying the details that others might overlook. Dust lay evenly across the coffee table, except for 2 faint, clean patches, rectangles where some had been moved. A newspaper folded to page 3. 2 empty mugs. A pair of reading glasses. He paused by the clock on the wall, its hand still frozen at 9:42. "You see this?" he said quietly to one of the techs. Power failure could stop it. Sure. But no outage was reported that night. The tech nodded uncertainly. "Maybe it broke." "Maybe," Hale murmured, but he didn't sound convinced. He turned toward the fireplace again. The gray-black ash glimmered faintly under his flashlight beam. He crouched, brushing the edge with a gloved hand. "Still oily," he muttered. "This isn't just wood." The tech leaned in, sniffed, and coughed. "Smells like kerosene or motor solvent." Hale nodded. "Bag, all of it. And get samples from the hearth bricks, too." The photographer clicked away, the soft staccato of the shutter breaking the hush. Every detail captured. The soot streaks on the brick, the fine dust on the mantel, the faint burn pattern reaching higher than a normal fire. In the kitchen, Hale found a cracked utility knife again, resting near the sink where he'd left it the night before. He unwrapped it from his evidence bag and turned it under the light. Rust, dried residue near the blade hinge. He ordered another swab. "It was used," he said. "Not recently, but not long ago either." The refrigerator was nearly empty. Half a carton of milk, 2 apples, and a Tupperware dish of stew. No sign of hurried packing, no missing leftovers, no half-prepared lunches. On the counter, a single note under a ceramic bowl, pale yellow paper. The handwriting neat, but hesitant. "Stephen, we're going to Michigan for a few days. Call Aunt Ruth if you need anything. Love, Mom and Dad." Hale read it twice, then again. The pen strokes were oddly deliberate, each letter evenly spaced, as if the writer were tracing rather than writing. The signatures at the bottom, James and Margaret Dane, trembled slightly, the ink thick at the turns. He folded it carefully and placed it in a plastic sleeve. "Get this analyzed," he told the tech, "and find me a handwriting sample from bills or letters in the house." At noon, Hale sat across from Stephen Dane in a narrow interrogation room at the Maple Hollow Police Department. Fluorescent light buzzed overhead, washing everything in pale yellow. Between them, a metal table and a cup of untouched coffee. Stephen looked calm. Too calm. He was thin, neatly dressed in a gray sweater and dark trousers, his posture straight, his voice even. His eyes were tired but dry. "They probably went to Michigan," he said. "They do that sometimes. Just didn't tell me." Hale raised an eyebrow. Without their car? Stephen hesitated for half a second. A small pause, but Hale caught it. Maybe they borrowed a friend's. Or took a bus. Who would they visit there? The Petersons. They have a cabin near Grand Haven. You got a phone number? Stephen looked down. No, I think Dad had it. Hale tapped his pen lightly against the notebook. When did you last see them? Friday night. We had dinner. Mom made pot roast. I went to bed around 10. You sleep well? Fine. Nothing unusual? No, Stephen said. Just the wind. The fireplace was burning late. Yes. You light it? Dad told me to burn some old paperwork. Old railroad bills. I did it before bed. Hale paused. The rhythm of the answers was too even, like a rehearsed script. You remember what kind of papers? No, just old stuff. Did you keep any? Stephen shook his head. He told me to burn them all. Hale made a note. Burn documents. Possible concealment. Then he leaned forward slightly. You find this note, he asked, tapping the yellow paper. On the kitchen table? Yes. You're sure it's your mother's handwriting? Of course. I'd recognize it anywhere. Hale studied him. Funny thing, Stephen, he said softly. Most people, when their parents disappear, they sound worried. You sound calm. Stephen met his gaze, unblinking. Panicking won't bring them back. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the fluorescent light filled the space. Hale could almost hear the snow tapping against the window. Finally, he pushed his notebook aside and said, If they call you, you tell me right away. Understood? Stephen nodded, folded his hands, and replied, Yes, Sergeant. I hope you find them soon. When he left, Hale sat for a minute longer, staring at the note under the light. The ink shimmered faintly, unevenly, smudged in one corner. He pulled a magnifying glass from his pocket. Under magnification, he saw it clearly. The letters trembled, the loops stuttered. It wasn't the natural motion of a woman who wrote music scores for a living. He wrote in the margin of his notebook, Possible forged handwriting. Needs verification. Then, softer to himself, nothing vanishes that clean. That evening, the temperature dropped to 10 below. The Danes' house looked deserted under a half moon, its windows reflecting police lights like cold eyes. Hale returned one last time before midnight. Alone. Inside, his flashlight beam cut through the dark, gliding across the furniture, the walls, the hearth. He walked slowly, every step muffled by the carpet. In the garage, the metallic smell hit first, gasoline and cold metal. Both cars were still there, the silver Ford sedan and the old brown station wagon, engines untouched. He swept his beam across the floor. The concrete gleamed faintly with thin streaks, as if something heavy had been dragged, then cleaned. He crouched, running a finger along one mark. The surface was slightly tacky. Gasoline, he murmured. He followed the streak to the door. Parallel scratches, about 10 centimeters long, cut into the concrete. Drag marks. Not deep, but deliberate. Outside, snow crunched under his boots. He circled to the backyard. The wind had calmed, leaving the world unervingly still. Under the fence near the east side of the yard, a patch of soil looked darker than the rest, half frozen, half loose. He knelt, touched it. The ground gave slightly. He straightened slowly. Someone dug here, he whispered. Then, after a moment, and someone filled it back in, he looked at the dark windows of the house, the place that had swallowed two people without a sound. For a moment, Hale imagined he could hear the faint crackle of a fire long dead. When he finally returned to his car, the notebook lay open on the passenger seat. He added a final line before closing it. Fireplace ash warm. Smell of solvent. Possible human residue. Note likely forged. No bodies. No trace of exit. The fire may have burned more than wood. Then he turned the ignition. The engine coughed awake. Behind him, the house on Willow Lane stood under the snow, perfectly still, its secrets cooling to ash. By Tuesday morning, the storm had passed, leaving Maple Hollow under a hard crust of ice. Sunlight glinted off snowdrifts piled along Willow Lane, but no warmth came with it. The Dane house, half buried under white, looked less like a home than a sealed tomb. Sergeant Richard Hale sat at his desk at the Maple Hollow Police Department. The case file spread before him, a thin manila folder already thick with questions. He had slept 2 hours at most. His coffee had gone cold twice. The label on the file read #MP 1980-417, missing persons, James and Margaret Dane. He wrote another line across the top page. No signs of departure. No forced entry. Possible stage disappearance. When the phone on his desk rang, he didn't startle. He was already awake enough to expect bad news. "Sergeant Hale," he said. It was Lieutenant Marjorie Lane, his colleague at the county office. "We ran the hospital checks," she said. No one under the name Dane admitted anywhere in Cook or DuPage County since Friday. No traffic accidents matching their car either. Hale rubbed his eyes. "You sure?" "Triple-checked. You still think they went to Michigan?" He looked at the open file, the photos of the house, the cold mugs, the stop clock. "No," he said quietly. "I think they never left the living room." That afternoon, Hale split the team into 2 groups. One canvassed the neighborhood. The other traced the alleged route north. Snow had wiped away everything, but routine demanded the effort. He himself went door to door along Willow Lane. The neighbor stories were almost identical. Nice couple, quiet people, never any trouble. Only Helen Morris, the one who'd seen the glow from the fireplace, remembered something more. "I heard voices," she said again, standing in her doorway, clutching her shawl. Not shouting, but sharp, like they were arguing. It stopped quick. I figured they made up. "What time?" Hale asked. She squinted at the sky, remembering. "A little after 10, maybe. My clock chimed once." "Anything after that?" "Sounds, car engine, footsteps." She shook her head. "No, just snow and the wind." At the corner grocery, the owner, Henry Gibson, remembered James stopping by Friday afternoon for cigarettes and a Sun-Times. "Seemed normal," he said. "Paid cash." Said something about bills he had to settle. "What time was that?" 3, maybe 4. "Anyone with him?" "Nope. Alone." That was the last confirmed sighting of either James or Margaret Dane alive. On Wednesday, Hale drove through the gray morning toward the Des Plaines River, 2 miles from Willow Lane. Snow crunched under boots as he and 2 patrolmen combed the frozen bank, long poles in hand. The wind off the water was brutal, stinging the face and numbing fingers through gloves. They probed the shallows, cracking thin ice, stirring only mud and dead leaves. After an hour, one officer called out, "Nothing but trash, Sarge." Hale didn't answer immediately. He stood still, scanning the slate-gray river, breath fogging the air. Then he said quietly, "Expand the radius." By sundown, the team had found nothing. No car, no clothing, no bodies. Only emptiness. Back at headquarters, Hale typed a preliminary summary. His fingers stiff from cold. He wrote mechanically, but his mind stayed far from the paper. Search of immediate vicinity yields negative results. Weather conditions continue to obscure potential evidence. Hypothesis. Disappearance occurred within residence. Cause unknown. He leaned back, staring at the typewritten lines until the words blurred. Within residence. He believed it. He just couldn't yet prove it. That night, he returned again to the house. He shouldn't have. The scene was sealed. But Hale's badge had always been half permission, half obsession. The wind had died, leaving the world quiet enough that he could hear his own boots on the porch. Inside, the air still carried that faint tang of smoke. He moved through the rooms with only a flashlight. In the kitchen, he stopped at the table, staring at the note again under plastic. "We're going to Michigan." He mouthed the words silently. The handwriting was too careful, the rhythm unnatural. He looked toward the fireplace, its black mouth yawning wide in the dark. He imagined what it might have devoured. The next morning, Lieutenant Lane brought new information. "Got something odd," she said, dropping a folder on Hale's desk. "Bank records. James Dane withdrew $40,000 in cash on November 18th, 2 days after the missing report. Hale frowned. Impossible. They were already gone. Clerk at the branch says a man matching Stephen's description came in with a power of attorney, claimed his parents needed the money for the trip. Hale's pulse ticked faster. Did the clerk verify the signature? She thought it was fine at the time. Said he was polite, looked like family. We pulled the slip. Hale examined the document. A clean signature, but off just enough to itch the eyes. The curve of the J, the flattening of the D, forged, he said quietly. Has to be. Want me to confirm with the handwriting unit? Lane asked. Yes, but it'll take weeks, Hale said. And without a crime classification, they might not even accept it. He stared at the withdrawal slip, the yellow note from the house beside it. Both signatures tried too hard to be perfect. He felt the same cold pressure in his chest as when he touched the hearth ash. Later that afternoon, Hale called Stephen back in. The young man arrived wearing the same calm face, as if none of this touched him. Hale laid the papers on the table. The bank slip, the insurance claim, the note. You know what this is? Hale asked. Stephen glanced at the withdrawal form. No, Dad must have needed cash for the trip. And this one, Hale tapped the insurance claim. Filed the same day in your name. Life insurance. Both your parents. Stephen's eyes flicked up, then down again. Someone must have stolen my ID. You didn't file it? He shook his head slowly. No, sir. Hale watched his hands. They were clasped tightly, thumbs rubbing together, a small tremor betraying the calm. He leaned forward. You know what I think, Stephen? Stephen didn't answer. I think your parents never left this house. I think that fireplace burned longer than wood, and I think you know why. The young man stared at him, his face pale but unreadable. You're wrong, he said finally, softly. You can't prove anything. Hale sat back, his eyes narrow. Not yet, he said, but snow melts. It always does. That night, he wrote his own summary, not the one for the official record, but for himself. The pages of his black notebook, filled with small, deliberate handwriting. All evidence points inward, not outward. No vehicle movement. No witness confirms departure. Handwriting of note inconsistent with Margaret Dane's known samples. Fireplace ash composition unknown, possibly organic. Sun displays abnormal composure. Motive financial. Status unresolved. Personal belief homicide concealed. He closed a notebook, sat back in his chair, and stared at the dark window. Outside, the streetlights glowed on sheets of untouched snow, blank and silent. He whispered to himself, barely audible, they didn't vanish. They're here. We just haven't looked deep enough. December came early that year. Gray skies, short days, and air that smelled of rust and smoke. Maple Hollow seemed smaller now, the kind of place where time itself froze along with the streets. The Dane house on Willow Lane sat dark, its curtains still drawn, snow building along the windowsills like white scars. At the Maple Hollow Police Department, Sergeant Richard Hale sat hunched over his desk, sleeves rolled, cigarette burning low in the ashtray. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, pale and sickly. The missing persons file lay open in front of him. Case #MP 1980-417, now heavy with reports that led nowhere. Every lead had turned to static. Every trail buried in snow. The state lab had sent back his first request that morning. The ash sample, labeled evidence A1, was too complex to test locally. Further analysis requires state-level funding. Estimated cost, $800. $800. A small fortune for a small department. The request was denied before lunch. At noon, Lieutenant Marjorie Lane arrived from the county office, her breath still visible in the cold hallway. You look like hell, she said, setting a folder on his desk. I feel worse, Hale muttered, crushing a cigarette. Got something new, at least. She opened the folder. Inside was a bank statement. The Danes' joint account at Illinois Trust and Savings. Last withdrawal, she said, pointing to the line. November 18th. $40,000. In cash. Hale frowned. That's 2 days after they vanished. Exactly. Teller says a young man handled the transaction. Early 30s, brown hair, glasses. She hesitated. Sound familiar? Hale stared at the photo of Stephen Dane, clipped to the missing persons report. It does. Lane continued. He presented a power of attorney document. Notarized, signed by James and witnessed by Margaret. Bank checked the signatures. Everything looked fine. And now, the copy looks wrong, she said. Look at this. Hale studied the document. A clean typewritten form, but the signatures at the bottom were too slow, too controlled. He'd seen the same tremor before, on the yellow kitchen note. He traced them. Hale said, "This is a forgery. Want to send it to the FBI handwriting unit?" Lane asked. "They'll kick it back." "No confirmed crime, no jurisdiction," Hale replied. "We need a body first." He closed the folder slowly. The paper edges soft from handling. He's covering tracks faster than we can dig. That evening, Hale went home late, but he didn't sleep. He sat in his armchair. The case file open on his lap, the sound of the radiator clicking like a clock. Outside, wind dragged against the windows, carrying the faint howl of the city in winter. He turned over the pages again. The yellow note, the forged withdrawal slip, the frozen clock at 9:42. He wrote in the margins of his notebook. Son benefits from disappearance. Financial gain motive confirmed. No evidence of travel by victims. Bank withdrawal inconsistent with timeline. Hypothesis, double homicide. Stage departure. Next step, confirm forgery. Locate assets, monitor subject. The next morning, he did something his captain would not approve. He called the insurance company directly. Mutual Life of Illinois, a tired voice answered. "This is Sergeant Hale, Maple Hollow PD. I need to verify a claim filed under the names James and Margaret Dane." A pause, the shuffle of papers. "Yes, we received one, dated November 18th. Filed by One Moment by Stephen Dane. He's listed as beneficiary." Hale gripped the phone tighter. "Filed how?" "By mail." He attached a death certificate from Mercy Hospital. "Mercy Hospital?" "No deaths there that week." "Yes. Well, the claim was rejected for incomplete documentation." Hale hung up slowly, staring at the receiver in disbelief. 3 days after reporting his parents missing, Stephen had already declared them dead. He wrote one sentence on a clean page. Fraud confirmed. No emotional reaction. Premeditated. The next few days blurred together. The cold seeped into everything. His office, his thoughts, the hollow silence that followed every lead. Hale tried to push through bureaucracy, but the department was small, the budget smaller, and the chief tired of a case without progress. On December 4th, Hale's request for a backyard dig at the Dane property was officially denied. The justification read, "Insufficient probable cause. No visible crime evidence." He stood in Captain Carver's doorway, report in hand. "Sir, the soil's been disturbed," Hale said. "I saw it myself. Something's buried there." Carver sighed, rubbing his temples. "We can't tear up private property. On a hunch, Rich. You don't have proof. I've got a son who forged documents, withdrew cash, filed an insurance claim, and doesn't care his parents are gone. How much proof do you need?" Carver looked up, tired. "A body." Hale's jaw tightened. "You won't get one until we dig." "Then you'll never get one," the captain said quietly. "Drop it. Move on." The words landed like a verdict. Hale stood still for a long moment, then nodded once. Understood. But he didn't move on. In the following weeks, he visited the Dane house alone. Not officially, just as a man who couldn't let go. The snow had hardened into a crust, the roof heavy with ice. The windows were dark, reflecting only the pale streetlight. Inside, dust had begun to settle over the untouched furniture. He walked to the fireplace and crouched. The ash, once warm, was now dull and gray. He pressed his fingers lightly into it, then wiped them on his coat. Cold, but not empty, he thought. He turned his flashlight toward the wall clock again. The hand still stood at 9:42, unmoving. In his notebook, he wrote, "Time of death? Unknown, but maybe not. On December 19th, Hale received the official closure notice. Case suspended status. Unresolved missing persons. He didn't sign it immediately. He sat at his desk, staring at the paper for an hour, smoke curling from his third cigarette. Then, with slow, deliberate strokes, he added his own handwritten note at the bottom margin. No evidence of voluntary disappearance. Probable homicide. Primary suspect, Stephen Dane. Case closed for the department, but not for me. He signed it, folded it neatly, and placed it in the file. When he left the station that night, the streets were empty. Snow fell softly under the orange streetlights, coating everything in silence. As he passed Willow Lane, he slowed the patrol car and looked toward the dark house at the end of the street. The curtain still hung closed. No smoke, no sound. He whispered under his breath, "You can bury a crime in snow, but not forever." Then he drove on, the red taillights fading into night. The winter of 1980 faded into history, like ink left too long in the rain. Maple Hollow changed, as all suburbs do. The elm trees grew taller, the houses newer, the families younger. But on Willow Lane, the red brick house stayed mostly the same, repainted, re-roofed, resold 3 times. No one spoke of the Danes anymore. Their names disappeared from conversation, then from memory, until they became just another line in an old missing persons ledger. Sergeant Richard Hale retired in 1993. He was 64, widowed, living alone in a small apartment near the Des Plaines River. His hair turned white, his hands slower, but he never stopped clipping newspaper articles about unsolved cases. In a box beneath his bed, he kept a worn black notebook and one photograph, James and Margaret Dane with their son Stephen, taken in 1979, the year before they vanished. Hale had written a single line beneath the photo. If there was a crime here, it was hidden well. He kept the file even after the department digitized its archives. Some habits don't retire. By 2015, Chicago was a different city. The factories that once lined the South Riverfront were rusted shells or parking lots. Developers dug foundations where smokestacks used to stand. The snow came later each year, but the air was still sharp enough to make you remember you were alive. On the foggy morning of March 12, 2015, a railway maintenance crew worked near the Calumet industrial yards, replacing decayed steel beams along an abandoned spur line. Around 9:40 a.m., the backhoe operator hit something solid, a heavy metallic thud beneath the dirt. At first they thought it was a junction box or scrap metal. But when the foreman brushed away the soil, a shape emerged, a rusted, rectangular case, about the size of a suitcase, sealed and corroded. On the lid, beneath decades of grime, faint letters gleamed in the weak sunlight, J.D. Jesus. One worker muttered, "What the hell's that?" They pried it open. Inside were charred fabric scraps, soil, and what looked like bone fragments, small and blackened. A broken wristwatch lay among them, its cracked face frozen at 9:44. The foreman stepped back. "Call it in." Within the hour, the site was cordoned off. Detectives from the Illinois State Forensics Unit arrived, followed by reporters chasing the scene of tragedy. The box was lifted carefully into a sealed evidence container. Its contents photographed, measured, logged, and tagged as Evidence 15-0312A. The next morning, the case reached the desk of Detective Natalie Reeves, Cook County Cold Case Division. Reeves was 38, meticulous, patient, the kind of investigator who believed silence could speak louder than witnesses. She'd spent a decade reopening dormant files, chasing ghosts across time. When she saw the photos of the rusted box, something about it drew her in. The initials, the ash, the stillness. She ordered the forensic team to fast-track DNA extraction. The lab's preliminary report came 3 days later. Despite 35 years of degradation, a partial genetic match surfaced, a 97.6% probability linked to Helen Dane, the sister of James Dane, who had submitted DNA in 1994 for a missing persons registry that never got a match. The report landed on Reeves's desk with a single typed line at the top. Remains consistent with James Dane. Reeves stared at it for a long time, then whispered, "We just opened a door that's been locked for 35 years. She requested the original case file from the archives. When the courier wheeled in the gray box labeled hashtag MP, 1980-417, its edges yellow with age, Reeves felt like she was touching another century. Inside were typewritten pages, photographs, and a black and white image of the red brick house on Willow Lane. At the bottom of the stack was a smaller item, a faded nylon evidence bag labeled in blue ink. A1, fireplace ash. Collected November 17th, 80. Sergeant R. Hale. The seal was still intact. Reeves stared at it, her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and reverence. She spent 2 nights reading Hale's reports, his steady handwriting in blue pen filling the margins. Ash smells a solvent. Note possibly forged. Son's demeanor unnatural. If they left, where are the cars? She recognized the pattern immediately, the kind of instinct that came decades before the science to prove it. On March 17th, Reeves drove north to Des Plaines, to a small apartment by the river. The door opened slowly to reveal Richard Hale, now 82, thinner but sharp-eyed, his posture still erect. When Reeves introduced herself and mentioned the name Dane, he didn't ask which case. He just nodded. "I knew someone would come back one day," he said. They sat in his small living room, sunlight filtering through lace curtains. On the table between them lay the old photograph of the Dane family in its silver frame, the same one from his file, now faded at the edges. Reeves briefed him on the discovery, the metal box, the DNA match, the reopened file. Hale listened quietly, hands clasped. When she finished, he looked toward the window, eyes reflecting the dull gray river beyond. "I always knew that ash meant something," he said softly. "We just didn't have the tools to prove it back then." Reeves nodded. "You did what you could." He smiled faintly. "No, I stopped too soon." Before leaving, Reeves asked if she could keep the old notebook on his desk, the one with his handwriting. Hale hesitated, then slid it toward her. "You'll need it more than I do," he said. That night, Reeves returned to the Cook County Cold Case Unit, a basement office lit by flickering bulbs and the hum of outdated computers. She placed the evidence bag on her desk under the yellow light. The faded blue label stared back at her like an unblinking eye. She typed a new request. Subject: reanalysis of evidence A1, fireplace ash. Possible presence of human remains. Priority: immediate. Then she wrote her own note in the case log. March 17th, 2015. File reopened. Evidence suggests homicide occurred within residence at 432 Willow Lane, Maple Hollow. Primary suspect, Stephen Dane, unlocated. Begin forensic reevaluation of all samples. She paused before saving the file. Outside, a spring rain began to fall, tapping softly against the basement window. It sounded like snow melting, slow, steady, patient. The past was waking up. The morning of March 20th, 2015, dawned gray over Springfield Avenue, the kind of light that drains color from everything. Inside the Illinois State Forensic Laboratory, the air hummed with a quiet intensity. Stainless steel counters gleamed under fluorescent strips. Machines ticked and whirred, patient as heartbeats. Detective Natalie Reeves stood beside Dr. Lane Porter, chief forensic biologist, as the old evidence bag lay sealed in front of them, nylon clouded with age, labeled in fading blue ink. A1, fireplace ash. Collected November 17th, 80. Sergeant R. Hale. The seal had never been broken. 35 years of silence, waiting for someone to ask again. Reeves watched as Dr. Porter carefully cut along the seam. A faint puff of gray dust rose, swirling under the light. The smell, old soot and something metallic, filled the air. "Careful," Porter murmured. 35 years of storage. Static alone could destroy the sample. Reeves leaned closer. The ash inside was a mix of fine powder and small black flecks, glittering like glass shards. Porter poured a small portion into a petri dish and slid it under the microscope. For a long moment, only the machine's hum broke the silence. Then Porter whispered, almost to herself, "Bone." Reeves straightened. "You're sure?" Porter nodded slowly, her eyes fixed to the eyepiece. Cortical bone fragments. Porous structure. Human. She looked up at Reeves, her face pale in the lab light. This isn't just wood ash. They spent hours separating the fragments, powder, metal bits, and fibrous residues, under magnification. Some fragments showed fine carbon scoring typical of cremation temperatures, above 1,000 degrees Celsius. Others carried traces of melted textile. Porter held one up with tweezers. Cotton fiber. Dyed mauve. Late 1970s production. Reeves nodded. Margaret's favorite color. When the spectrometer results came in, the computer displayed a chemical signature. Calcium phosphate, collagen, fatty acids, unmistakable traces of burned human tissue. Reeves exhaled slowly. So it's her. Porter looked at her. Let's be sure. They extracted DNA from 3 of the bone shards overnight. Degraded, yes, but 2015 technology could do what 1980 couldn't. The next morning, when the results appeared on screen, Reeves stood frozen. 99.3% match. DNA consistent with Helen Dane, maternal relative. The ashes in that bag weren't just remnants of fire. They were Margaret Dane. Reeves sat in her car outside the lab for a long time afterward, staring through the windshield at the drizzle streaking down the glass. The city around her went about its business. Traffic lights changing, horns distant, but she felt like she was standing on the edge of 2 timelines colliding. 35 years of silence had just turned into a scream. That afternoon, Reeves called Captain Harris, head of the cold case division. It's confirmed, she said. DNA from the fireplace ash matches the missing woman, Margaret Dane. Her husband's remains were in the metal box found in South Chicago. Harris went quiet. You're telling me we got both of them? Yes, sir. Both victims identified. Double homicide. 1980. He let out a slow breath. All right. Reclassify the case. You just turned a missing persons file into a murder investigation. Reeves typed a new line into the digital archive. File #MP 1980-417. Reopened March 2015. Reclassified as double homicide. Victims, James and Margaret Dane. Primary suspect, Stephen Dane, unlocated. The cursor blinked, as if waiting for the next 35 years to pass. That evening, Reeves drove to Willow Lane. The house looked different now. Repainted pale gray, with trimmed hedges and new shutters. But the red brick chimney still stood, the same one that once exhaled smoke into the winter sky. She parked across the street, engine off. The air was damp, filled with the smell of thawing soil. She could almost picture it. 1980, snow swirling, the orange flicker of firelight behind the curtains. A couple mid-argument. A son watching, listening. A clock stopping at 9:42. She stood there for a while, arms folded, feeling the echo of the house through the years. Then she whispered, "You burned her, didn't you?" In the same room, she raised you. Her voice disappeared into the wind. Back at the precinct, Reeves compiled her interim report. She attached the lab results, the photos, the 1980 evidence notes, and one scanned page from Hale's original notebook, the line that haunted him. The fire may have burned more than wood. She wrote beneath it in new ink, confirmed. The next morning, she called Hale again. His voice over the line was faint, but steady. It was her, Reeves said. The ashes were Margaret's. You were right all along. There was a long pause, and Hale said, I wish I'd been wrong. For weeks after, Reeves and her team dug through every record they could find. Social security numbers, old addresses, employment histories. Most trails went dead in 1982, except one. A data analyst found that James Dane's social security number had been used to open a utility account in Missouri in 1984, under a different name, Mark Dalton. The birth year matched Stevens. The handwriting on the form, too neat, too careful, matched the note from 1980. Reeves printed the file and held it for a long time. The past, once buried under layers of ash and time, was surfacing again, one forged signature at a time. She turned off the light in her office, leaving the report open on her desk. Outside, rain whispered against the glass, the city half asleep. And in that quiet, she heard what Richard Hale had always known. Ash remembers. It always does. By August 2015, Chicago was sweating under a relentless summer sun, the kind of heat that clung to everything and made even the air feel suspicious. But inside the Cook County Cold Case Unit, the chill never lifted. Detective Natalie Reeves leaned over a stack of old records, the hum of the ceiling fan slicing the silence. She'd spent the last 4 months piecing together the vanished life of Stephen Dane, the son who reported his parents missing 35 years ago and then disappeared himself. Now, finally, the pattern was clear: quiet, deliberate, methodical. After 1982, there were no driver's license renewals, no tax filings, no recorded income under his real name. But in Springfield, Missouri, a man named Mark Dalton had appeared that same year. Same birth year, same height, same handwriting style on an employment form. And the Social Security number? It belonged to James Dane, his father. Reeves read the Missouri DMV file twice, then whispered to herself, "You didn't vanish, Stephen. You just changed the name on the door." She requested a search warrant through the FBI Interstate Division. Within a week, a folder arrived via secure courier, bank records, tax forms, and photos from a recent property inspection. In them, Mark Dalton stood beside a 2-story wooden house shaded by maple trees in the city's quiet south end. The property included a small garage filled with machinery, an auto repair business registered under his name. Neighbors described him as polite but distant, worked 6 days a week, drank beer on his porch every night. No wife, no children, no friends. To them, he was just another middle-aged man living alone, the kind that fades into background of American suburbia. But Reeves knew better. The past doesn't fade. It hides. At dawn on August 14th, 2015, a convoy of 3 unmarked cars rolled through the narrow streets of Sunrise Lane, Springfield. The sky was pale blue, still half asleep. Birds scattered as tires crunched the gravel. Reeves sat in the front seat, vest tight against her ribs, the warrant folded in her jacket pocket. "Target is inside," radioed the local sergeant. "Garage lights on. Looks like he's prepping for work." Reeves stepped out of the car, her boot sinking slightly into the soft earth. She took a deep breath and nodded. "Execute." The call echoed down the street. "Police, step outside with your hands visible." For a moment, nothing. Then the front door opened. A man stepped out slowly, tall, silver-haired, his hands half raised, half reluctant. His face was calm, eyes gray and unreadable. "Mark Dalton?" Reeves asked, voice steady. The man looked at her, almost curious. "Not anymore," he said quietly. The team moved in, cuffing him gently, almost respectfully. Reeves read him his rights as the cicadas screamed in the distance. When she reached the words, "You are under arrest for the murders of James and Margaret Dane," he didn't flinch. Only after a moment he whispered, "I knew this day would come." Inside the house, the silence fell heavy, curated. The place was immaculate. Tools lined in perfect rows, no dust on the workbench. Everything labeled, ordered, symmetrical. A life organized not for comfort, but control. On a small desk in the corner stood a framed photograph. A man, a woman, and a young boy. The Danes. Written on the back, in faded pen, were the words, "Willow Lane, 1979. Next to it lay a wooden box containing an old utility knife, its handle cracked, and a small .22 caliber ammunition case, half empty. In a drawer, Reeves found a dismantled pistol barrel, corroded and stripped of its serial number. She bagged everything, labeling them Evidence 15-08, A through F. When she reached the living room, something else caught her eye. A family calendar on the wall, neat handwriting marking appointments. Inspection Monday, oil shipment, taxes. Each page identical, structured, repetitive. Every month the same rhythm, a life running on clockwork. As if he were still trying to keep time from stopping again at 9:42. At the Springfield Police Department, the interrogation room was cool and gray, walls bare except for a small clock ticking far too loud. Reeves sat across from him. He looked thinner under the fluorescent light, eyes dull but alert. "You know why you're here," Reeves said. He nodded once. "Because of something I did a long time ago." "Something?" she asked quietly. "Or someone?" He didn't answer. Reeves slid a photograph across the table. The metal box found in South Chicago. The initials JD still visible on the rusted lid. Then another. The DNA report linking the fireplace ash to Margaret Dane. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. He stared at the photos, jaw tightening. "I don't want to lie," he said. "But I don't want to remember either." Reeves leaned forward. "You've had 35 years to forget. Now it's time to remember." Later that afternoon, as the sun bled to blinds, the news hit Chicago. Son arrested in 35-year-old cold case. The headline ran across the Chicago Tribune front page, next to a grainy photo of a younger Stephen Dane, smiling faintly, unaware that time was waiting for him. Television anchors recited the story in somber tones. After 3 decades, the disappearance of James and Margaret Dane has been reclassified as double homicide. Their son, living under a false identity in Missouri, has been arrested. Outside a grocery store on the city's west side, an elderly woman watching the broadcast whispered, "He was always so polite. Who could have guessed?" That evening, Reeves called Richard Hale. He answered after 2 rings. "It's done," Reeves said softly. "We found him." The line went quiet. Then, through the static, she heard Hale's voice, thin but steady. "I lived long enough to hear that," he said. "Don't let them die again on paper." Reeves didn't answer. She just looked out her hotel window at the Missouri dusk, the sun sinking behind rows of maple trees, the sky burning red like the embers of an old fire. She opened her notebook and wrote, August 14th, 2015, arrested Stephen Dane, alias Mark Dalton. Evidence seized, utility knife, .22 ammo, family photo. Statement, I knew this day would come. Case moving to Cook County for prosecution. Then she closed it, the pen's click echoing softly in the quiet room. Outside, thunder rolled far away. Deep, slow, almost like the earth itself remembering. The interrogation room was a box of gray steel and white light. It was August 17th, 2015, 3 days after the arrest. Outside, Missouri heat shimmered across the parking lot. Inside, the air was cool still, suffocating. Stephen Dane, now 63, sat at the metal table, wrists cuffed, his posture straight but drained. His hair, once dark, was silver now the color of ash. Across from him, Detective Natalie Reeves flipped open a folder thick with photographs, reports, and evidence tags. The clock on the wall ticked past 9 a.m. Reeves glanced up. You've been quiet for 3 days, she said evenly. Ready to talk? He didn't move, just stared at the blank wall as if waiting for something. Finally, he said, voice low, it was an accident. Reeves leaned back. Then, tell me about your accident. He exhaled, eyes glassy. It was November. Cold. The house smelled like smoke. His voice was steady, detached, the kind of calm that only comes after years of rehearsal. Dad found out everything, he said. The lies, the money. He said he'd call the police. Reeves said nothing. She just let the silence stretch. I'd been taking money from their account, Stephen continued. $35,000. I forged his name. He found the withdrawal slip. Reeves turned a page. The document was there, dated November 18th, 1980. The signature shaky, wrong. Stephen looked at it, eyes flicking across the ink. He confronted me that night, called me a thief, a failure, said I was no son of his. He paused. I told him I could fix it. He didn't believe me. Reeves's voice stayed soft. Then what happened? He swallowed. I went to the cabinet, took his gun, the .22. I wanted to scare him. The room felt smaller now. Even the air seemed to listen. He turned away, Stephen said. I called his name. He turned back. I pulled the trigger. He blinked slowly, as if trying to see the moment again. He fell near the table. The clock fell to, broke on the floor. 9:42. Reeves froze. 9:42. The same time Sergeant Hale had written in his report 35 years ago. Stephen's voice trembled for the first time. Mom screamed. I told her not to. I told her it was an accident. She didn't believe me. She said she'd call the police. He looked down at his hands, the cuffs clicking softly as he moved. I couldn't think. I just wanted it to stop. His eyes went distant, as if the words were no longer his. I remember smoke. I remember the smell of burning. I remember her ring melting on the brick. That's all. Reeves sat still, letting the silence hang heavy between them. Then she said quietly, "You burned her in the fireplace, didn't you?" Stephen didn't answer, just nodded once, eyes wet but unfocused. I thought if there was nothing left, they'd believe they went to Michigan. Reeves took a slow breath. "And your father?" I dragged him to the garage, wrapped him in tarp, drove to the rail yard in South Chicago, buried him under the steel beams before sunrise. He looked up at her, voice cracking. I went back home. Mom was gone, just ashes and smoke. He stopped talking. For a long time, neither of them moved. The only sound was a faint hum of the air conditioner and the clock's relentless ticking. Reeves opened a small folder and slid it toward him. Inside were photographs, the rusted box, the bones, the cracked wristwatch frozen at 9:44. "This is your father," she said quietly. "We found him. We found her too. You burned her, Stephen. You didn't just erase them. You cremated them in your own house." He closed his eyes, tears spilling down his face for the first time. "I just wanted to make it right," he whispered. "But I didn't stop." "Why?" Reeves asked. "Why not run then? Why live like this for 35 years? He took a deep breath. "Because every night I could still smell it. The smoke. It never left. So I thought if I lived quiet, worked, stayed invisible, maybe it'd fade." He opened his eyes, staring straight at her. But it never did. The fire never went out. The confession ran 14 pages. Every sentence steady, written in his own trembling hand. When it was over, Reeves read the final line aloud. "I accept responsibility for the deaths of my parents, James and Margaret Dane, on November 15, 1980. I alone did this. I am sorry." She slid the paper toward him. "Sign here." He did, slowly, deliberately, his pen shaking. Then Reeves signed beneath it, her initials looping beside the date, August 17th, 2015. When it was done, Stephen leaned back in the chair, eyes half closed. "Do you think they can forgive me?" he asked softly. Reeves looked down at the paper, the weight of decades distilled into ink and silence. "Forgiveness isn't my job," she said. "My job is to remember." That evening, Reeves faxed a confession to Cook County for processing. Outside, the Missouri sky was bleeding gold and red as the sun fell behind the hills. She walked out into the parking lot, the hot air thick against her skin, and for a moment she thought of Sergeant Hale, 35 years earlier, standing in the snow, staring at that same red brick house and whispering, "No one vanishes completely." He'd been right. The wind shifted, warm and heavy, carrying the faint scent of motor oil and smoke from a nearby garage. Reeves stood still, listening to the hum of the city and the soft ticking of the clock in her memory. The case that began with warm ashes had finally found its fire again. Only this time, it burned with truth. The lab smelled faintly of ethanol and steel. Rows of instruments lined the counters like soldiers waiting for orders. It was September 2015, and Detective Natalie Reeves stood once again in the Illinois State Forensic Lab, watching a story that had waited 3.5 decades finally finished writing itself. On the table before her sat 2 sealed containers. One labeled Exhibit A, metal box, Calumet Rail Yard. The other, Exhibit B, Fireplace Ash, Willow Lane. Each held fragments of the same family, divided by time, fire, and lies. Dr. Elaine Porter, calm as ever, adjusted her gloves. "We'll start with the rail yard box," she said, her voice low but sure. "You should see this." Under bright surgical light, the team lifted the rusted box's lid. Inside, fine black soil cradled dozens of bone fragments. Small, fragile, but unmistakably human. Porter used tweezers to place each piece on a sterile tray. "There," she murmured, pointing at a dull gray chip. "Rib bone. And here, femur, fractured, consistent with blunt trauma or projectile entry." Reeves stepped closer, her reflection caught in the metal edge. "How many wounds?" "2," Porter said. "Both .22 caliber." Entry from the back, traveling upward through the spine. Close range within 2 meters. The lights hummed. The air seemed to thicken with the gravity of it. That matches a confession, Reeves whispered. Porter nodded, almost word for word. 3 days later, the second container, the fireplace ash, was open for comprehensive testing. Fine gray powder poured over a stainless steel tray like silk, catching the light in subtle glints. The lab quieted as the scanner hummed, capturing the smallest traces. The analysis revealed calcium phosphate concentrations consistent with cremated bone, but also chemical residues. Paraffin, gasoline derivatives, and industrial solvent. Porter circled the readings on the printout. See this pattern? That's a high-oxygen burn, not accidental. He used flammable accelerants, likely gasoline, maybe rubbing alcohol. Same composition as the samples Hale took from the garage floor in 1980. Reeves nodded slowly. He used what he had in the house. It wasn't panic. It was method. Among the fragments, the team recovered a single metallic curve, small, thin, and slightly melted. Porter lifted it with tweezers. Underwire from a bra, she said quietly. Late 70s manufacture. Reeves stared at it, throat tightening. Margaret. They also found a fragment of enamel, scorched and brittle. Dental analysis confirmed it came from a woman in her 50s. The DNA sequence matched the earlier test. A 99.3% link to Helen Dane, the victim's sister. The ash had spoken one final time. When the ballistics team examined the .22 caliber bullets retrieved from the box, they discovered faint rifling marks still visible despite corrosion. Using comparison microscope, Porter matched the striation patterns to a dismantled pistol found hidden in Stephen Dane's Springfield garage, the same gun registered to James Dane in 1978. Reeves stood behind the glass, arms folded, watching the technician align the images. When the patterns overlapped perfectly, Porter didn't speak. She just turned the monitor toward Reeves. It's the same weapon, she said. No question. Reeves took a deep breath. He shot his father with his father's gun. Porter nodded, and then burned the mother with the same oil he used to clean his tools. The symmetry was cruel. A mechanic precision turned into a murderer's ritual. Over the next weeks, the forensic reconstruction came together piece by piece. A 3D model of the skull appeared on the screen. Digital, ghostly, almost alive. Entry wound through the 8th rib, Porter narrated. Exit near the vertebra. Angle of trajectory confirms the shooter was standing behind the victim, slightly to the right. The bullet fragment, analyzed through X-ray fluorescence, revealed identical alloy composition to the ammunition found in the Missouri house. The fire, Porter added, reached over 1,000 degrees Celsius, a contained high-intensity burn, consistent with a fireplace chamber and forced airflow from a metal poker or bellows. She looked up at Reeves. That's how he did it. He fed the flames until there was nothing left. Reeves swallowed, and he thought it would stay that way. The final forensic report ran 214 pages. Dense, technical, indisputable. Every paragraph aligned with Stephen Dane's confession. Every equation with Sergeant Richard Hale's intuition. The conclusion read, cause of death, gunshot wounds to the back, James Dane. Cause of death, thermal destruction, Margaret Dane. Evidence of deliberate concealment through incineration and burial. Fire accelerants match chemical residues from 1980 garage samples. Firearm identified as .22 caliber pistol registered to James Dane. DNA confirmation. 17 STR matches across both victims. Estimated time of death, November 15, 1980, between 9:30 and 10 p.m. Reeves read it twice. 35 years condensed into 6 paragraphs of science. The weight of truth measured in milligrams and carbon trace. She thought of Hale's old note. If there was a crime here, it was hidden well. Then she whispered, not anymore. That afternoon, Reeves drove back to Des Plaines. Hale's health had worsened. His hands shook when he opened the door, but his eyes were still clear. She placed a report on his coffee table. It's all confirmed, she said softly. Every word you wrote in 1980 was right. He read the first page slowly, the letters swimming behind his thick glasses. The corners of his eyes were in the light of late afternoon. I said once that the earth remembers, he murmured. Turns out the fire does too. Reeves smiled faintly. You never stop believing. He closed the file gently. No, but I stopped hoping. Until now. Outside, the sky turned amber, the river glinting gold between the trees. For the first time in decades, the story had a body, a name, and a voice. That night, as Reeves drove back to city, the radio played quietly. The weather forecast, light rain near Lake Michigan. She didn't listen. Her mind was still in that house on Willow Lane. The frozen clock at 9:42, the warm ashes cooling in the dark. 35 years ago, a young sergeant stood in the snow and whispered, "You can scrub floors, wipe blood, bury trash, but the ground always remembers." He was right. The ground remembered. The ash remembered. And now, finally, so would history.